Which meditation centers do you go to meditate?
I go to East Bay Meditation Center, which has been very helpful. And it's not, I'm sure a lot of you know, it's on, I think, Harrison. And I usually go to their day longs. Very, very helpful. Very helpful. So.
It was really interesting hearing about your mom being the one who introduced you to therapy in high school. And I was wondering, and maybe she might be better to answer this. She's already funny. But as a parent, what are some of the things that you noticed about her, and how'd she sort of come to you and say, "I'd like to, bring you to therapy"? How do you do that as a parent for your child?
You feel comfortable answering? Hold on.
It's been so long, I can't really even remember, but I just noticed little changes in her that just wasn't right. So I said, you know what, I better, jump on this really quickly. And just took her to see a therapist to make sure, to check out, was there anything right or wrong going on here? And I'm just so thankful that I did. But one of the things was, there was something going on with me too, because she was a big girl, and I didn't want her to walk to school. I wanted to take her to school. I didn't want her to take the bus or anything like that. So once I took her to therapy, the therapist said, well, just let her, take the bus. And so I did one time. She didn't want to do it anymore after that.
I don't know about that.
No, she didn't. No, well, maybe she did it a couple of times. But then she wanted me to pick her up after that.
Okay. Fact check. We'll go fact check that. But I did, I was crying, I was very irritable, those kind of things, and just really depressed and didn't want to do things, signs of depression. And then she told me, I'm going to go find someone to talk to, so.
What would you say to people who have partners living with a mental illness? Because a lot of times I think people say, oh, it's not that bad, or get over it, suck it up. So like for someone who has a partner that's living with a mental illness, what would you say to them to be a better ally?
Yeah, that's one of the worst things you can tell somebody is to suck it up, or like just cheer up. It's like I have depression, right? Whether depression on both. I know people on both sides of my family that have had depression issues. So I think for me it's genetic. I think instead of telling them to just suck it up, just to say ask how you can be supportive to them. Ask them what they need. Maybe too when they're in a good space, when they're well. Talk to them about things that they would need in case they get into a very, very depressed, mood or mode. But yeah, telling someone just to cheer up is not the best thing to do. Just ask how you can support them. Especially with depression, maybe they need, and anxiety too can work too. Like maybe take them somewhere, see if they need to, go out and have fun, or just again, changing your thoughts. Like if they're looking really hard at a situation, then ask them, well, maybe, is it, okay, you don't think you're gonna get this job interview, but baby, you got a job interview, you got a job before, you nailed it, right? Kind of just being encouraging. And then too, talk to a therapist too for yourself, just so you can better understand and self-educate yourself on whatever diagnosis and challenge they have.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation you're doing. And
thank you.
I work here, and I feel so fortunate to have you here and have this whole enterprise here. So thanks. And so I'm at work today, hey. And so with my anxiety today, one thing that I struggle with is my time management. Because when I have something that's scary, I'm like, I think instead of doing that, I'm gonna watch 15 cat videos. So yeah, any tips about that would be great.
Yeah, just in luck, because I talked to my therapist about this a few weeks ago. So I'm like, get out of my head. Yeah, I told my therapist I was struggling with that. And she talked to me about better with time management, just really, she made me get a planner. And well, she didn't make me, but she highly suggested it. And so really just kind of just mapping out your time. Also, what helps for me too is that because sometimes I'm a writer, so sometimes I have anxiety before I write. And so what's been helping me is before I write is to kind of just say some, the word escapes me, but just kind of repeat a mantra or something like to myself, say some positive words to myself to motivate me to keep going, and that I'll be okay and that I can write this. Or sometimes listening to a little soft music. I had to do that the other day when I was at work because I was kind of anxious, and I just put in Pandora. Actually, I went on Pandora because I had my relaxation station, and that just helped me just to relax. So just think of your wellness tools. I don't know if that helped some. Yeah, but I'm with you. I know what you're going through.
You alluded to this a little bit in talking about the anxieties around social media, but I was wondering if you could muse for a second on the intersection of journalism and mental health.
Wow, that's a big topic. That could be a whole nother discussion. I think, well, as far as journalism, do you mean covering or just being a journalist and managing your mental health?
Yeah, just from your personal experience, how the two collide or don't.
So with journalism, again, with anxiety, you're always on deadline. So that puts a lot of pressure on you. And it depends what you cover. Some people, they cover a lot of murder. And so that can affect their mental health too. My first time I went to London, I was interning at Time magazine, and Al-Qaeda bombed some of the transit systems. So my first big assignment was to cover a terrorist attack. And I'm talking to people who have been traumatized. I'm talking to people who are Muslim, and they're afraid of a racial backlash. And so I had, so I'm anxious and I'm excited, but I had to even use some of those mindfulness tools to calm myself down. Sometimes with journalists too, sometimes we don't always eat the best because we're working around the clock, depending on what our beat is. So it's definitely something, and some journalists haven't wanted to have a greater conversation about this. It's definitely something important because you see all kind of things, and especially you may talk to someone that have to interview somebody and they just lost their kid, right? And then so how do you deal with that? And you have to take that home. So it's definitely important. It's definitely important.
I'm heavily medicated, which is how I can show up and be charming today.
Yes.
But I have one of the things that really jumped out is when you talked about mental health in the Black community. Because I'm still trying to understand how to talk to my family about it. But do you have any other insights? Like, why is it such a stigma for us, especially?
Yeah. And also, too, I did forget, thank you for mentioning medication, because there are people that use medication, and I know there's a stigma against that, too. And if you need medication, use your medication. So there's different reasons why there's stigma within the Black community. I think we don't go to therapy in higher numbers like other groups. One thing is because the history of medical racism. So there's distrust. There's some distrust about the medical system. Also, too, there's issues with religion. So growing up, one of the reasons why I had stigma, because I would go to church and I'd hear the pastor say, don't take your problems to a therapist, take it to Jesus. And I love Jesus, but I'm like, Jesus, I need a therapist. Or like I would hear, you just need to pray harder, you need a better relationship with God. And so a lot of Black people, that's actually one of the first places they go is to church when they're having issues. And there are mental health advocates that are trying to train Black church leaders on how to be aware when they see mental health symptoms and to refer people for therapy. And then also, too, I think, again, just kind of like what I said, there's this pressure to be, as Black people, to be strong, and that we've been through so much, and so we don't really need therapy, because our ancestors, what we went through. So if you depressed, that's nothing. You're not on a slave ship, right? So it's there's that issue. And then another issue is that there's not a lot of therapists that are of color. I'm working on a story about that now. There's not a lot of therapists of color. And so you may go and meet with a therapist and they don't understand you culturally, because usually when I go to therapy, I ask for a woman of color, preferably a Black woman. But I ask for a woman of color just because sometimes my issues are cultural. And especially right now, what's going on, there's a lot of people of color that are dealing with depression and anxiety just because of just the political environments and just all kind of things going on. So it's different reasons. So.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. This is my first creative morning. And
okay, great.
I have a question I think kind of relates to some of the other questions that were asked, but do Do you have any tips on how to start talking to people about mental health, especially like loved ones who they themselves are dealing with it? Yeah, just starting that conversation, and maybe also if you have different cultural backgrounds, just how to be aware.
Yeah, and different cultures may approach it differently, and and there's therapists and providers and mental health advocates who are trying to provide support and infusing different culture to treat people within their culture. I guess one of the best ways, that's always a hard question for me to answer, but I guess just kind of when you approach them, like you think this person may have a mental health challenge and they don't recognize it, maybe just ask them what's going on, ask them how they're feeling, ask them, have they talked to anyone, or like, what are people saying, and encouraging them like not to feel ashamed. That could be a start. Because I think the big struggle for people is that there's this stigma, because it's like, oh, you think I'm crazy, right? And so I don't usually, I try not to use those kind of words, because it's like, we don't say nasty things to people that have cancer or that have lupus. That's just a health challenge. And mental health, when you have a mental health problem, that's just a health challenge. So those may be a good starting steps. Maybe look at people in your other culture, maybe that are doing videos or they've done research maybe, and they maybe talk about how to broach that subject with someone in your culture, and that may help too.
You sort of started answering this question by saying that you look for women of color. What are some other key questions that you ask when trying to find the right therapist?
So you can, for me, usually it's like a woman, and I may meet with a person and we may not click, and so then I may have to get another therapist. But I kind of want to make sure that they understand where I'm coming from. The last therapist I had, she was Latina, and so our family dynamics were similar, so we could kind of relate. I encourage people, if you want someone that may be from the LGBT community, because you don't think they can relate to you if you're queer or trans or whatever. You can ask when you're looking for therapists. You can find out if these people, have specialized in certain issues when you're doing your research. But that's mainly usually I'm more, for me personally, I'm more interested in like culturally what's their background so they can relate to me.
I'm curious how you differentiate between your own anxiety, your own challenge, and righteous indignation. Like, you're not shut down, you're on strike. Like, the outside situation is something you can't control, and you're just through dealing with it.
I think the outside influences, what's going on too. I'm just thinking about people who, there's been so much concern about immigration. And I think when you're looking at certain groups, especially people that are underrepresented, or quote unquote minorities, the outside affects your mental health, and if you're somebody you may have loved ones or friends that may be undocumented, and we're seeing all these news stories coming up about ICE raids, that can affect you. That can affect you mentally. That can affect you and make you anxious when you're walking down the street, or just like how we see so much homelessness. That hurts me when I see so much homelessness in my neighborhood where I grew up. So I think definitely the outside affects the inside, the environment. And that's part of anxiety, like, trauma or environment that can cause it. So it's just learning how to juggle. And I've given a talk about that too, just learning how to maintain your mental wellness when there's so much issues going on in the world. It's not easy, but
I don't know if mine is a question so much as, I guess, a comment to add on when you were talking about dealing with mental health through the ages and medication and something, or what have you. I just wanted to share this story when I was in graduate school. And I was completely overwhelmed and on myself, like walking down the street, reading note cards, like, oh my God, I can't even figure out. And so that idea that sometimes you have moments of anxiety where it's not your normal state, and I couldn't figure out how to deal with it. 3 years I went on like this. And finally, I had an actual anxiety attack that led me to the Student Health Center. And going through the process of trying to find a therapist, which when I was in that moment, I couldn't even be bothered with. It's like you're talking about finding a therapist. That's a really hard relationship to find and establish, especially when you're in a moment of crisis. because just sitting yourself down to talk to someone to get to know them again, and then not having that relationship really feel like it's making any difference. And along the way, I was talking to my brother, and it was so funny because I started taking anti-anxiety drugs. And I was like, I don't know if I need to bother this. And he just said to me the most profound thing. And he's like, who the hell has time for anxiety? You know, it's like you can take this pill and just keep it moving. And in that way, the medicinal side of it, just allowing me to tamp down and focus on what I needed to focus on in that moment, was so helpful and profound. And so when we're talking about people of color, so many people in my family were like, oh my God, that's ridiculous, and you know, just deal with it and what have you. My best friend, who is not a person of color, a German woman, was like, what? No, you know, we fix problems. And so it's, you know, and I constantly, like even dealing now with my mom. So like the last comment I wanted to add on it, it's all levels through all different stages of life. You will find these moments. So now talking to my mom who's 75 and, you know, dealing with her loneliness, I'm like, you can actually just skip the therapist and talk to your doctor, okay? For people that aren't quite comfortable breaking into therapy, it's a hard road to get there or whatever. For a lot of folks, they can't quite afford it or whatever. Your regular general care physician is someone that you can talk to, so always leave that out there as a recommendation to your friends.
Yeah, and I know Kaiser and other medical institutions are doing that, where I forgot the term for it, where the medical doctors are working with therapists and kind of building a care team, and you can talk to a medical doctor and they can refer you to someone. And yes, grad school, I was in grad school, so I know what you're talking about. Grad school's rough.
So I don't know if this is a quick question or not, but you talked about sort of the negativity of anxiety and you overcome that as a journalist. What's the positivity of anxiety? Do you experience any of that in your work?
Anxiety a lot of times is that you're kind of worried about the future. So the perks of having anxiety when you're worried about the future is that maybe you're planning for something or preparing for something. So that can be good that you're preparing for something. Of course, if that anxiety is interfering with your daily life, then there's a problem. For me, I channel that anxiety energy when I'm doing a story because I need to get my deadlines. You know, I need to make my deadlines, or I channel that energy just to make sure I have all my facts straight, to make sure I don't have any typos on my articles or my scripts and that kind of stuff. So that's when it benefits me. And again, it's just that sometimes when I have an anxiety attack, which is rare, but when I do have it, then I know there's a deeper issue, emotional issues going on that I've kind of probably suppressed. But like I say, it's more enemy than friend. That's why I call it my frenemy. And I just want to say one thing with stigma, just to let you know, I told people about just to tell you about the weight of the OJ trial, I told people I had depression and anxiety before I told people I was related to my dad. So that just tells you, like, I was like, I'll tell you that, but I'm not telling you the other thing. I meant to mention that too. So that just tells you the weight of it all, so.
Awesome. Please help me give a warm round of applause for Jenee.